We're diving into World War II today,
Okay.
but not the battle or the big names you always hear about.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is about the women, millions of them, who were
Wow.
vital to the war effort.
I see.
And our guide is this specific edition of Stamp magazine
Okay.
called Unsung Heroes, Women of World War II.
So these stamps, they're not just pretty pictures. They're really like little historical snapshots,
Yeah.
each one telling a story
Uh-huh.
about what women were doing during the war.
Mm.
And you might be surprised by what you see.
Oh, I bet. The magazine mentions almost 7 million women in Britain alone.
Wow.
Were part of the war effort?
That's a huge number. It really is.
Yeah.
To put that in context, imagine the entire workforce reshaped, like practically overnight.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, this was a time when women faced prejudice based on gender, class, and race.
Right.
So to contribute on such a massive scale, despite those barriers, it's incredible.
It really is. So which organizations were these women a part of? I mean, were they all in one place or?
Well, you had the main military branches, the Auxiliary Territory Service,
Okay.
the ATS for the Army,
Okay.
the Women's Auxiliary Air Force,
The WAAS.
yes, and the Women's Royal Naval Service, the WRNS.
Okay, so those are the big three. But initially, their roles weren't front and center, right?
No, not at all. It was much more about supporting the men, filling gaps as needed.
Okay.
But as the war dragged on, and the demand for manpower grew, things shifted dramatically. These women took on increasingly complex roles
I see.
and proved their capabilities far exceeded initial expectations.
So necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there was the Women's Voluntary Service, the WVS. They had over 1 million women involved.
Wow, 1 million. So I'm picturing this massive organized effort.
Oh, and not just within Britain. The WVS included women from British colonies and dominions all over the world.
So global.
Yeah, global.
I was looking at some of the tasks the WVS tackled, and it's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went from air raid training to running emergency centers, evacuating children, even darning socks for soldiers.
Really shows their adaptability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They were constantly filling gaps, responding to whatever the war effort needed,
Wow.
doing it all with such resourcefulness.
It wasn't all voluntary, though, was it? Stamp magazine mentions that from December 1941, single women between 20 and 30 were actually required to contribute.
That's right. Conscription was introduced, highlighting just how essential women's labor had become.
Yeah.
The country literally couldn't function without them.
Wow.
And the range of work they did is astonishing. Industry, agriculture, medicine, transport. They were even involved in the secret services.
Wow, they were everywhere doing everything. Before we dive into the individual stories, which of these organizations or tasks we've mentioned stand out to you?
You know what really strikes me? Is the WVS's work beyond Britain itself.
Okay.
Their presence in the colonies and dominions adds this whole other layer to the story. Imagine the challenges those women faced. Navigating different cultural contexts, often with limited resources, all while contributing to this global war effort.
So this entire episode, it's not just British history. It's a global network of women united by this extraordinary circumstance.
Absolutely. And each of those individual experiences within and beyond Britain deserves to be explored.
For sure. So let's start bringing those individual stories to life by looking at some of these stamps.
Okay.
The first one that caught my eye was repairing Army vehicles. It shows women in the ATS doing mechanic work.
Completely flips the script on those traditional gender roles, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about keeping the home fires burning anymore. It's about keeping the entire army running.
Yeah.
Think about the skills and knowledge they had to acquire to do that kind of work.
Back in the 1940s?
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Really was a turning point in how women's capabilities were perceived.
Okay, so we've got women as mechanics, and then there's this other stamp that just blows my mind. Deciphering enemy messages. It depicts the women at Bletchley Park breaking the Enigma codes.
It is like something out of a spy movie.
Right?
And their work wasn't just exciting, it was absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
Historians credit the codebreakers at Bletchley Park with shortening the war by years,
Wow.
potentially saving countless lives.
Wow.
Imagine the pressure they must have felt, knowing that the fate of nations rested, in part, on their ability to crack those codes.
Talk about unsung heroes.
Yeah.
Their contributions were literally changing the course of history.
And they did it all in secret, under incredibly demanding conditions.
Right.
Their stories are a powerful reminder that heroism comes in many things.
Yeah.
It's not always about being on the front lines.
Let's look at the stamp titled Supplying Military Production. It shows the WVS doing more than just factory work. They were organizing the collection and distribution of materials, making sure nothing went to waste.
The logistics involved in that. These women weren't just workers, they were organizers, planners, problem solvers. They
Wow.
were ensuring the smooth running of the entire war effort, often behind the scenes.
It's easy to overlook those behind-the-scenes roles, but they were every bit as essential.
Hmm.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. These women were adaptable, resourceful, and willing to tackle any challenge thrown their way.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget the stamp, lighting the way to victory.
Oh, yeah.
It shows women in the ATS operating searchlights during air raids.
Talk about bravery.
Imagine standing out there, in the dark, knowing you're a target,
Right.
but still focused on doing your job, protecting others.
They weren't just supporting the war effort from afar. They were on the front lines of defense,
Yeah.
facing incredible danger, with courage and determination.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Before we move into the Spitfire women, I want to pause and ask you, our listener, what's resonating with you so far? Which of these roles has surprised you the most? Or made you think differently about women's contributions during the war? Take a moment to really consider these stories, because they're not just about stamps. They're about real women who made a real difference.
They're reminders of the power of human resilience and adaptability in the face of extraordinary challenges.
And we're just getting started. Next, we're going to delve into the world of the Spitfire women, those incredible female pilots who defied all expectations.
Now, when you hear Spitfire women, you might picture daring fighter pilots, engaging in dogfights.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But that's not quite the story here. The miniature sheet in this Stamp magazine issue, it celebrates the women of the Air Transport Auxiliary,
Okay.
the ATA. They weren't flying combat missions, but ferrying aircraft between factories and airfields.
So they weren't fighting, but they were flying these powerful planes all over the country in the middle of a war.
Oh, absolutely.
That still sounds pretty dangerous.
Think about it. Navigating unpredictable weather, potential enemy attacks, the pressure to keep these vital aircraft moving must have been immense.
That takes courage.
Without a doubt. And the fact that they volunteered for this role, knowing the risks, speaks volumes about their dedication.
Yeah.
The magazine notes that 168 women volunteered for the ATA, and 2 of their 14 ferry pools were made up entirely of female pilots.
Hold on. 2 entire ferry pools were all women.
Yes,
That wasn't just a token effort then. Sounds like they played a significant role.
exactly. This wasn't about publicity or making a statement. It was about getting the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And these women proved they could do it just as well as, if not better than, their male counterparts.
It really makes you reconsider those assumptions about what women were capable of back then.
It certainly does. And it's a testament to how the wartime context forced people to reevaluate those assumptions.
Okay, so we've seen all these incredible examples of women's contributions during World War II, from mechanics and code breakers to searchlight operators and pilots. But what about the lasting legacy? Did all this wartime service translate into real societal change afterwards? I'm kind of turning to you for this one,
Okay.
because you always have such insightful perspectives on the bigger picture.
Well, imagine millions of women suddenly stepping into roles traditionally occupied by men.
Right.
It was like this massive, unplanned social experiment playing out in real time.
Did it actually change anything in the long run?
Disentangling the war's impact from all the other historical forces at play is tricky business. It's not a simple cause and effect.
Right.
But it's hard to deny that these wartime experiences had a profound impact on the way people thought about gender roles.
You can't just erase those experiences, even after the war ends.
Exactly. Suddenly, women had experienced a level of independence, responsibility, and purpose that they hadn't before.
Yeah.
Think about the women in the ATA. They weren't content to just go back to being housewives. After having flown Spitfires all over the country, they tasted freedom and had proven their capabilities.
So did these experiences directly lead to movements like the push for equal pay and opportunities?
That's where things get more complex.
Okay.
While some historians argue there's a direct link, others point out that those movements were already brewing before the war, and the post-war context presented its own challenges.
And not like sexism just vanished overnight.
Not at all. But the war experience undeniably shifted consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It exposed the flaws in those pre-war assumptions about women's capabilities
Okay.
and demonstrated that they were capable of much more than society had previously acknowledged.
So the war cracked open the door, and then it was up to those later movements to push it wide open.
That's a great way to put it. And we could see this shift reflected in the changing workforce demographics. In the decades that followed,
Yeah.
more women pursued higher education, entered traditionally male-dominated fields, and demanded equal treatment.
Okay, that makes sense. But was there any specific example where women's wartime work directly translated into post-war employment gains.
Absolutely. Take the engineering sector, for example.
Okay.
During the war, women were instrumental in aircraft production, shipbuilding, and other heavy industries. They
Wow.
were welding, operating machinery, and managing complex projects.
So really hands-on.
Yes, very much so. When the war ended, many of those industries continued to thrive, and the demand for skilled labor remained high.
Yeah.
Women who had proven their abilities during the war were now well-positioned to fill those roles, even if they faced continued prejudice and discrimination.
So the war essentially forced these industries to recognize the talent pool they had right in front of them.
Precisely. It wasn't always easy, and those women had to fight hard for their place. But their wartime experience had given them a crucial advantage.
Uh-huh.
They had the skills, the experience, and the determination to succeed.
I never realized how directly those wartime roles influenced post-war employment. It's amazing how these seemingly separate chapters of history are actually so interconnected.
And it's a reminder that societal change barely happens overnight.
Right.
It's a long, complex process, with both setbacks and victories along the way.
Yeah.
But the wartime contributions of these women undeniably played a role in pushing that process forward.
Okay, this is all so fascinating, but I feel like we could talk about the post-war period for hours.
Oh, there's certainly a lot more to uncover. But for the sake of our listener, I think we should start wrapping things up.
Yeah, it really hits home that even in the darkest of times, people found ways to not only survive, but to thrive, to break boundaries, and to reshape their world.
It's incredibly inspiring. Makes you wonder what our world would look like today if those women hadn't stepped up, if they hadn't challenged those expectations.
Yeah, what if those women hadn't been there to repair those vehicles, decipher those codes, ferry those planes? What if they hadn't pushed for those opportunities, even when faced with resistance?
It's a thought-provoking exercise, to say the least.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It shapes who we are today and the possibilities for the future.
As we wrap up this deep dive into unsung heroes, I want to encourage you, our listener, to keep exploring. If any of these stories have sparked your curiosity, delve deeper. Research those individual women, learn more about those organizations, and consider how their experiences resonate with the challenges and opportunities we face today.
Because the more we understand these unsung heroes, the more we understand ourselves and the potential we all have to make a difference.
Beautifully said. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Until next time, keep diving deep.